pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay. All right, this is our first call to the public. We don't have any slips.
Okay, is this the economic?
Yes.
Okay, alrighty.
Oh, it is?
Yes. Okay, I thought we were going to go with what happened with us.
Watch the.
Here, watch. Just watch this.
Well, okay, thank you. Okay.
You can hand them to her.
Yeah.
Pass them
Did you want to speak now or later?
I'll speak now.
Okay.
I understand from tonight's agenda that you're going to be approving and advancing to the full board the consideration of the draft for the zoning ordinance for solar and wind. I would just like to reiterate, having a further setback, 500, and also the fact that we need the LMAX. I've been looking at the draft that was submitted from the Planning Commission back in August, and I cannot find LMAX in here. And also, I'm going to let Teresa speak on that one issue. I don't know, I assume most of you are aware that the state initiative is on to repeal Whitmer's legislation for taking over the local zoning. I talked with Kevin Martis, who is spearheading the campaign, and he informed me that this is not a Republican issue. This is a bipartisan issue. And it not only affects the rural areas, it also affects cities, villages, and also brownfields. So I don't know if you are aware of the press release that came out. I don't know if this is something that I could submit to the committee to include this in the commissioner packets. Would that be all right? Okay, appreciate that. Okay, thank you. I would hope you consider those setbacks and the LMAX, and Teresa's going to speak on the other issue.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up, Teresa Bank.
So at the Planning and Zoning Board, when I spoke to our question of Pete Preston, he said that they didn't take anything out about the LMAX, that was in the original ordinance. But going through that copy that she has, I don't see it in there. It's like it's taken out. And what that does, it means it cannot be any higher than. And when you have that out of there, it can be an average or interpreted as an average. So I think you're opening a door to trouble unless someone's going to be out wherever these things are measuring that all the time. The property line, everything was from property line, and there was one, I think it was in the solar, where it was from a building, your home. And before, everything was at the property line. That was another thing I questioned him on, and he said, oh, we didn't change that. But I see that difference there. One of the biggest things that I see, and that was with the old ordinance, is the complaint issue. If you did have a complaint, you're supposed to do it in writing, and then it has so many days. I think it's 10 days for anybody to respond, and then they give the company another like 15 days or something like that to fix the problem. But in this day and age with computers,
Ignore that, the battery died.
that's okay. I'm not sure why we don't have something online with a complaint and someone addressing the issue within a couple days. I mean, if it's noise or flooding or whatever the issue is. I mean, we've seen what a mess that is out there with a solar industrial site along Juddville and 13. And I just think we could come up with a better way of addressing complaints in our county. And the last thing is, when I was looking for these changes so we could, spend some time on them and really look at them, they're never posted. So we have a few days, it seems like we end up trying to find somebody who has a copy and then taking the time. So if you want public to comment, to me, at least put it on the website so we can see what your changes are and actually have some time to really look into the situation and see if there is anything else we would like to address.
So those are my points.
Thank you. All right, is there anybody else? Hearing none, we'll move on to community development report with Mr. Pete Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Building permits, we had 12, and we had 12 zoning permits. We did have one new home started in December, and I just processed one in the office today. On our code enforcement, we're at 45, which we are maintaining an average. We've also been going through district court and working with the prosecutor's office on a couple particulars where it goes from less than informal to a formal hearing. So that has been moving a lot better than it has in a long time. So that's all I really have right now, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
No, thank you. Townships will appreciate that.
All right, thank you. All right, moving on to agenda items. Item A, I'd look for a motion to approve in advance for full board consideration to draft zoning ordinance amendment regarding a renewable energy district, including the recommended revisions as presented. Further move that corporate counsel is directed to prepare a formal zoning ordinance amendment to reflect the same and present such amendment for consideration by the Board of Commissioners.
I'll support it.
Thanks.
Or I guess I make the motion, yep.
I'll support it. All right, so now we can discuss. Would you like to?
Would you like me to present on this?
Yes.
Okay, so pursuant to the discussion at the last committee meeting last year, I have reviewed this and discussed it, and we've proposed some changes here. So again, the intent from a legal review was not to alter the policy decisions that were made by the Planning Commission and to allow this board to make any other sort of policy decisions or changes that they would like to. So things like, you know, the general spirit of the ordinance and all of that. So my focus was on some legal elements. So a summary of the proposed revisions would include adding a little bit more detail on how distances are calculated for purposes of some of the provisions of the ordinance that require minimum distances between developments, and also some of the distances that are calculated for purposes of submitting an application, right? So one of the things would be making clear that we want an expansive definition of the distance that needs to be mapped and described when someone is applying for a solar or wind energy system, so that the Planning Commission ultimately has the most information possible from the widest area that could be potentially impacted by such a development. We did add a section, I did add a section after some discussions, just looking at some of the developments that are going on in the area of wind and solar energy, some of the issues that are coming for a community such as Shiawassee County, given the unique nature of our county's farmland and agricultural resources that need to be considered and protected during development. During any development, we did add a section regarding that, specifying that any applicant would have to identify farmland potentially impacted by a development, and also to provide very specific information about certain types of federally recognized important farmland, of which there is some in this county. And there's 4 different categories of that, so that has been added. Again, legal and technical, but I think something that's important to be considered, since that is an issue, I think, in all of these developments, is how the agricultural resources of the county are protected. I did again in the system of measurement, just making some making somewhat more clear how that 1.5 mile distance between developments is measured, and that's on the nearest point between the two relevant development areas, right? So we don't want it to be from one side of one area to the far side of the other area. I don't think that was the intent or spirit of what was put before me. So we made sure that that's very clear, that we're looking at minimum distances there to make sure that that 1.5 mile provision is faithfully enforced. Moving into the decommissioning section, I did just change some of the legal and specified some of the legal terminology for the 2 different types of securities that are allowable for a decommissioning. And again, I think it's important to remember that in this case, decommissioning doesn't just mean taking down and taking out of service. As the Planning Commission's draft very thoroughly explained, decommissioning includes a lot of things, including that, taking down, taking the equipment out of service, but also reclamation of the land, and putting it back into a reasonable state to be used for what it had been before. So making sure that any surety bond or letter of credit, that the amounts are in there, that they need to come from a reputable financial or bonding institution or bank. Making it very clear that the amount required for a decommissioning guarantee can be reviewed by the Planning Commission to not just account for inflation, but to account for other sudden or dramatic changes in the cost that it might take to decommission and reclaim the land involved here. One of the things in my prior experience that I've run into in working with other municipalities is that if you are forced as the county to take action against a guarantee or a bond, you often find yourself in a situation where your costs, including legal fees and administrative costs, quickly overrun the amount that has been set aside. So we've tried our best to make this this ordinance reasonable and flexible for the county so that they're not caught in that position down the road. So that has been clarified in there as well.
Before you move on, I would note that it allows the Planning Commission the right to review it annually to increase the decommissioning of the site, and every year they would have to meet those obligations.
Yes, under the current draft, it's been in there. It's clarified that the decommissioning amount that's guaranteed would need to, at a minimum, go up by the Consumer Price Index every year, and then that bigger review could go annually. So effectively, that could put the Planning Commission in a place to really be able to monitor these situations so that they don't get out of control. We all saw what happened to, say, construction costs during the pandemic. As an example, I would say if you had fixed guarantee amounts from pre-pandemic times, you'd have maybe a third or a half of what you actually would need to do a reclamation. So that's why that's in there. And then the rest were mainly cleanup of a few legal things. So those are the changes that have been proposed from the prior draft, in keeping with my instructions with the board. And now, if approved for putting into final ordinance form for Wednesday, or for that, if that is ultimately the decision of this committee, we would add some cross-references throughout the ordinance to make sure that names and titles and terminology lines up with the ordinance, and we make sure that like the zoning use table and things were updated as well. So that would also be part of the motion that is in front of you that is in front of this board right now for consideration. But what you have right here really just focuses on the meat of the new proposed district and the regulations encompassing the district.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions?
I do, because you were on the Planning Commission, so I just wanted to know, can you address Teresa Bancow's concerns about the LMAX and the setbacks and addressing complaints?
Yeah.
Did those things change?
We did not change them on purpose, and I want to bring Pete up if I can. The LMAX, I think the way that we changed that was that we took it out of the wording and put it in the definition of the ambient sound level.
And that's something I'd have to look at. I think that might have been the case, that we have it in the definitions section there. However, LMAX is not supported across the board. It is a maximum, and I think what I heard was that the concern is that the interpretation will be that it's on an average. And that interpretation would be by the zoning administrator. We don't want any gray areas, but LMAX is not necessarily supported by all ordinances in the state. And what I've reviewed, it's in some, it's not in the others. So to me, the more common is a decibel reading. That's also how we handle other types of uses in the county. So that, are we going to use LMAX for every type of use? So with sand and gravel and other operations, we just use a decibel reading. Measuring decibels and not, the LMAX is referring to, and I don't totally understand all of those letters they throw at me in these different ordinances, but is essentially describing a maximum, so it doesn't exceed that, whereas in other places it's an average. Well, in a gravel pit, if you're crushing rock and it's at 70 decibels, and I can or the county can afford a decibel reader that will measure, that, then that's more of the, commonly accepted. I don't see us being able to stand between a gravel pit and a neighborhood and simply say, hold on, we have to take an average over 12 hours. There's a lot of enforcement that's built into this, and it also puts a lot of the onus for enforcement on the applicant in wind or solar to go ahead on an annual basis for the planning commission to review and for us to seek compliance that way.
I did notice in the ambient sound level, when I read this earlier, that it says that shall mean the decibel measurement or dBA of background sound pressure level exceeded 90% of the time. So
that's common, that's what we've seen in other ordinances common. That was also what was reflected in the previous wind ordinance that was developed by the county. So we tried our best not to monkey with the two, but merge them and not, like such for wind turbine height. We didn't go back into that discussion because we considered that argument already settled with the previous ordinance adoption. But what we're trying to do here is to create a district so as many levels of review can take place and the actual feasibility of the development be decided before we dive into the site plan and special land uses, which lead to a lot of subjectivity.
And that's one of the things I think that we should highlight here, is that currently you can go and you apply to the planning commission and then they would vote on it, you'd have your site plan review. That's not going to be the case now. Walk them through the new process in each step of the hearing process.
Sure. So the first step would be to apply for a rezoning, just as if someone was going to, out in the agricultural area, put a subdivision in. In order to have lot sizes that are less than 1 acre and be on a new road and such, they'd have to rezone that to a residential district. Why? Because they have a higher density. They're going to have, they have larger needs for services, and so we create this district because we want that type of development, or not want that type of development, but that type of development needs to go through a process of showing, their community impact. So what we decided to do was go through the process and say you have to rezone an area that you would like to do renewable energy in, and what that does is bring us into a public hearing process before the county planning commission. And then the county planning commission, with township input, has to present a recommendation to this board. And this board then, at that point, looks at all the criteria and can remand back to the planning commission if necessary. Because the planning commission in that capacity is only charged with having the public hearing discourse, and to provide a recommendation, but not to approve. Some of you, were tuned in when we went through the original wind turbine ordinance. The burden of the special land use in those high intensity types of discussions, you can see the weight borne by appointed officials. So this way, this would come up to you folks as a recommendation, and then if it's considered that yes, this is viable, they meet all the criteria, they're close to power lines, they're not going to impact the agricultural areas and the viability of that, then it would go back to the planning commission for the very detailed site plan review. At that point, the public has another bite of the apple in order to look at that. And in there's public notice requirements for us as well. So you almost have 3 types of public notice going on in the review of one project, as opposed to one public notice with a special land use.
So just to sum that up, planning commission, public hearing, township input, board of commissioners, then either back to them or moving forward, then back to the planning commission, then an additional public hearing. So that adds about 5 different levels to the approval process as opposed to the current one that you have.
Which one's final?
Not till the end of the whole entire process.
Yeah.
Yeah, but who does that?
So if you approve the rezoning, then it would, if the Board of Commissioners approves the rezoning, which means it also have to go through your committee hearings here and then to the final Board of Commissioners, then they'd have to go back and apply again for a site plan and then have a site plan review, which is where they're going to put everything, and then have that approved by the Planning Commission. So they would have the final vote on it after it's gone through your board a couple of times.
So the final is the planning commission. It
And
was
those
kind of confusing to me.
And that's the very detailed site plan. That's looking at where the stick is or where the edge of the solar panels are. And thank you to Mr. Morris for clarifying some of that, so there's no ambiguity at that stage. It's not left to staff in an administrative provision in any way, but it's really getting down to, you've actually had an engineer, architect, or a surveyor determine how far this line is, and then we're in more of a verification of the information mode as opposed to subjectivity mode, which is what gets planning commissions in a lot of trouble with special land uses.
One thing I did want to be clear on, Mr. Preston, and this is dealing precisely with the LMAX and the sound measurement. I trust you're not saying that we picked the one that's in the ordinance because X number of other townships or counties use it. Did you or did we make a qualitative determination that regardless whether X number of townships use that method, that was a method that was good for us that we could use to regulate the project once it's in place? Are you satisfied that it gives us a strong basis to be able to regulate what the developer is doing?
In my opinion, yes, it gives us a basis to do that. And there's many ordinances out there that contain many different regulations, and that's part of the reason why the state has moved forward to have some sort of uniformity in the state for the particular use. So am I confident we can enforce at this level? Yes, I am. But as noted here, you know, the 90% and stuff, some of that burden as we go through the rezoning process, as we go through the site plan, is going to be placed upon the developer as well to show compliance. And that's something that's going to be worked through. Also, there's one extra level we need to look at with the rezoning, and it's a conditional rezoning. And so an applicant can offer up conditions to essentially appease the concerns out there. So it's not the end of the road when we just have the rezoning and we're looking at where transmission lines are, or we're looking at the impact on ag. If the sound is an issue, there's discussion that can be had in a very generic way that the developer would be able to say, you know what, we'll do exactly this, or we'll do exactly that, or we will provide you this type of annual survey, something to that effect that you can accept as a condition to the rezoning. And that becomes part of the record of not only the site plan, but of the rezoning itself, and would come before this board too. But I'm confident in what we have to enforce.
Okay. But of course, that presupposes that the facility is in place. And part of what our plan is to try to determine in advance what impact it's going to have. So the fact that they have to submit some subsequent yearly report doesn't help us so much there. It's so I guess I'm focusing on that when they come in with a plan before they've constructed it, that you're confident that we have an enforceable regimen that is predictive. It may not be perfectly predictive of what's going to happen, but it gives us a fair idea that what they're proposing is going to comply.
Yeah, and I think every bit of diligence that we offer with any particular use, as far as we can see in the future, as far as we can crystal ball, what's going to happen, we try to put all those preventative measures in place and protect adjacent properties, because that's our charge on that these particular uses do not impact the personal use enjoyment of other properties, however, without being prohibitive to any particular use, overly restrictive.
Could I add something to that, Commissioner Emery?
Sure.
You know, so I think the other thing and just from me reading this, is to look at, you're taking these readings on, we're using sound because it's a very important issue. the readings are from the boundary line of a non-participating parcel, not to a structure on a non-participating parcel. So there's ways that, in addition to the metric that you're using, whether it's LMAX or DBA, the way that you measure it, the structure, basically the rubric that you use to measure it, can put an additional layer of sort of protection for those people there. And I think the ordinance does that in that one regard. The other thing is, you know, I was just kind of looking at 40 decibels, and I think it's on the pretty low end of, you know, of a sound, as far as a decibel number for, I think it's described as quiet conversation. So I think that while there's many different ways to measure things, and there may be, you know, this one you combine everything together, the ordinance works well together, if that makes sense, right? It's the whole thing has to work well together. That's what the planning commission has done. So they put something together that the whole structure of it works well. And I think what Pete was kind of saying is that we know how to measure decibel, we know how to measure dBA, we can measure it. We have the ability to do that. And when he's talking about enforcement, part of the reason is you want to be able to have a very clear and cost-effective way to do enforcement, because then you'll be able to do more of it. So I think that's where it becomes relevant.
In other words, since the measurement's taken at the boundary, whatever setback to your structure where you are, you're gonna have, it will attenuate the sound.
You might have an additional slight buffering there, depending on the situation of where you're at. But that's just an example of how just a pure measurement, you know, just using a scale, which scale you pick is important, but you know how you implement that is equally important too. And I think that's where the ordinance is very well written.
Well, the quiet conversation sounds good. I suppose that depends on who's you're conversing with and what they're saying to you at the time. Iron Fist and Velvet Glove, but anyway, okay,
Okay. Any further discussion? Thank you for the input. With that, all in favor of moving this on to Wednesday, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion passed. All right, next up, item B. I'd look for a motion to assume the Village of Byron's Building Code Administration jurisdiction as requested by the village.
I'll make that motion.
Support.
All right, we have a motion with support. Discussion?
So very briefly, the village has sent a letter requesting that we take over their building code enforcement, and they feel they don't have the ability to do it at this time. That doesn't mean they can't take it back at another time. I think that their use and volume is relatively light. Pete, do you have anything else to?
No, and that's the conversations that we've had, that we already have the jurisdiction for electrical, mechanical, and plumbing. They are going to keep their own zoning. We have no problem with that because of some of the issues and subjectivity and politicizing of some of that. But it's just straight building code. We're down in Burns Township anyways, and the new zoning administrator is already setting up systems to potentially work with us.
Perfect.
I don't think this would be a heavy lift.
Do not think so either.
Not a high economic impact to
And since, you know, they sit in the middle of Burns Township and we're already servicing the township, I think it will be a good fit.
Okay. Further discussion? Hearing none, all of those in favor to move this on to Wednesday, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, motion moved on to Wednesday. Item C, I'd look for a motion to approve a 90-day notice of termination under the contract with the city of Langsburg for building, permitting, and inspection.
So moved.
Support.
All right, we have motion with support. Discussion.
This one's a little different, and I'm going to let Pete explain some of the intricacies of it. But essentially, we provide the city of Langsburg a service under contract, which is different than assuming the actual jurisdiction, which has some potential legal conflicts in there. Pete, do you want to say more about that?
Well, I think that's absolutely it. For a number of years, the county's been providing this service for essentially a flat rate to the city of Langsburg. Over time, legal issues regarding enforcement to where at that point, our building inspector would go in and say, I'm under contract, you're doing this wrong, and then not get compliance and have to turn to the city's attorney to enforce it instead of going through the normal process that we would with the civil infraction or a stop work order. And so this makes it cleaner. Over the past 2 years, there has been a couple of difficult situations, and it doesn't even come close to covering the flat rate that we were being paid. So I've considered this timely. I've spoke with the city of Langsberg a couple times over the last couple of years regarding this. Their current leadership looked at this last fall about saying we don't no longer want to use the county because of all these issues, whether it was our fault or not. But they've already had those discussions, and I think 90 days is very fair for them to either decide to have the county do it under their jurisdiction or to go out and seek other assistance.
So that doesn't mean that we'll stop doing it. That means they could request, just like Byron did, that we assume the responsibility, and that will absolve us of the conflict if that's what they wish to do. But they could also take on responsibility themselves, like Duran, Corunna, Berry, Owasso, the other cities. So that'll be up to them.
So I understand it, if we take it back over, then the conflict, they're out of it then? Is that
Well,
it?
I'm just saying that currently they have the jurisdiction
Oh,
for building,
Oh.
but they use us as contractors. Okay, so the liability is essentially falling on both of us at that point as we do our enforcement and our inspections and permitting. This way that they either use someone else or they just give us the jurisdiction and we go ahead and pursue permitting and enforcement that way. And that way it's all under one umbrella instead of having to deal with other levels. That way we go straight through the district court here. We don't have to rely on their corporate counsel to take something through district court.
And this is only building inspection, not zoning.
Correct. Yep, Spicer Group currently does the zoning for the city of Langsberg.
And have we told them we're gonna do this?
I can reach out to them before Wednesday's meeting.
Thank you.
I don't think it'll come as a surprise to them.
It sounds like it's cost us more than what we were paid.
I wouldn't say it's been excessive, but I think that in the last couple of years, it's proven there were a lot of trips to Langsberg. I'd watch my inspectors from my office go up and down the road. Too many times.
All right, further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of moving this on to Wednesday, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Excellent. Next motion. I look for a motion to approve the purchase of a new lawnmower from John Deere in an amount not to exceed $26,138.20.
So moved.
support.
All right, we have a motion of support. Discussion.
So very briefly, this was put in the Parks and Rec budget. The Parks and Rec budget was reviewed by the Parks and Rec Commission. They agreed with this expenditure. This is a lawnmower that would be used for Parks and Rec services by our guys. It greatly exceeds my purchase authority, so it has to come to you for approval.
Okay. I did have one question. Is there a reason that we chose Hudson and Williamston and not in Corunna?
It is coming through, kind of.
Is it?
But it's through state purchasing,
Okay.
and that's mainly the reason why. But it is more or less coming through Corona.
Okay.
But it's through state purchasing, so it's a lower price than what you
Right.
would. Your normal homeowner would not be able to go out and buy this lawnmower for that price.
Sure. Okay.
And it'll be picked up and delivered through
Corunna.
Corunna.
Okay. And I'm assuming this is the kind of mower we want.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a lot heavier duty than most that we have.
All right. Excellent. Any further
So was
discussion?
that the decision was made by Parks and Rec that this is the kind of mower who, by,
Yeah.
okay,
Experience.
gotcha.
How that usually happens is for like the Parks and Rec budget, Tim and myself put that together as one of the divisions under his purview, his departments. And then they take it and I think maybe Tim and Larry presented it to the Parks and Rec board to get their approval, and then it was folded into the county budget for approval.
We didn't have a special mower for him before, is that it?
I don't think so. I think we're just using our regular ones.
Is that true? Okay.
And then with state pricing, we don't need to bid it out because it's
No, it's through state.
pricing. Okay. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of moving this on to Wednesday, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion passed.
Mr. Chairman, before you abdicate the chair, I have one more issue which I had intended to bring up with respect to Part A, which has been approved and is going to the commission, and that's fine, but I guess I got so enthralled with our sound measurement discussion that it slipped my mind. I thought I heard that the plan in its final form was not on our website. Is that true? Is it on our website for the public to look at, as we finally are considering it now?
Unless Pete posted it, I didn't post it.
I don't think the version we just approved is.
No, the original probably is, but not Eric's edited version.
Yeah. I'm troubled by that somewhat, that what we're voting on is not on the website, and I wonder if that can be implemented post haste.
Posted.
I don't see why not. Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, that brings us to our second call to the public. Hearing none, meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
All right, let's call the Finance Committee to order. If you'd stand for the pledge, please. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Looks like you've cleared the room for any call to the public, so thank you for that. And why do I have Pete on here?
Yeah.
It should be Julie. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Unless Pete, oh, he left.
Unless he wants to give the
Unless he
treasurer's
wants to,
report.
right. Good evening, everybody. Right now in the office,
office, we're busy with our dog licenses. A lot of people doing them through the mail, which we're happy to help if that's the way we want to do it, but it is a lot more through the mail than I was kind of expecting. But it's fine. We've been doing them over the phone and again through the mail, and a lot of foot traffic in the office. We're at about 550 licenses so far. Just keeping us busy. Other than that, coming up February 2nd in my office, I'll be holding what they call a show cause hearing. So homeowners that would like to request any kind of extension, if they think they're not going to be able to pay their 2021 taxes by March 31st, that's their opportunity to come into the office to request to set up some kind of payment plan, and just to get them on that list before the February 16th actual hearing with Judge Stewart. That's when my attorney, along with myself, would present to Judge Stewart the list of the properties that we would like to grant a little bit of an extension. We make sure they're working out a good payment plan and that they're putting in good effort. So that will be happening the beginning of February 2nd, and then the 16th, the actual hearing with Judge Stewart. Sometimes that's even amended after the fact, though. We can add people in later, but it's best if we can be organized and get it scheduled beginning of February. I also have a conference coming up February 4th through the 7th that I'll be attending up in Mount Pleasant, and I'm looking forward to that. That will be before our February meeting comes up. So things are busy, but going good.
Julie, so for the ones that are approaching that point where you would have that court intervention, how many approximately do you think you're working with?
I hope not too many. I think the My Half program saved a lot of people this year, so I think it's going to be far fewer than we normally see. A normal list could be a good 50 people or so, and I don't expect it to be that many this year. I really don't.
So less than 50?
Yeah. Right now, I've already kind of started a little list, people I've talked to, keeping their phone number, keeping a list, and I just have 5 people
Okay.
on it right now.
And that's probably about, when I've looked at the numbers that I've gotten from the Register of Deeds office, that seems about right.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
very few.
And again, it's that My Half program that took care of people's 20s, 21s, and 22s that really saved them this year.
Well, they can thank all of us taxpayers.
And
for that.
hopefully, going forward, they stay on track and we don't find them back in 3 years, trying to stay on top of them and make sure they can keep up with it then. I've told them, please don't expect that handout. That was a gift. That was a real big gift, and that they shouldn't expect that again going forward.
Yeah, I
Right.
certainly hope they don't, because I don't think that we can withstand that kind of taxpayer debt.
Right.
And I don't see how people can't keep up on them. I don't see what that might have. Jobs are everywhere. Work another job.
I know. I understand what you're saying, and we also offer them the opportunity to make partial payments. So I'll say if you $100 a month, if you could, but for some people it's a lot. Some people really are living on a fixed income of next to nothing. We'll talk to people that I get $700 a month from Social Security. It's hardly enough to live on. So that's a whole nother issue.
But yet they could never rent.
Right.
Yeah. Tax. Thank
Or,
God they
and
don't
that's
have
what
to
I've said, you don't have a house payment, pretend this is like your rent. I've had those conversations with people. Oh, that makes sense. Some of them follow through really nicely, and we see good change, and others, it's just kind of continues same old.
Sounds like parenting.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, that's all I got, if anybody else
I
has.
have two questions.
Sure.
Going back to the dog licensing,
Mhm.
I'm gonna ask them at the same time. One, have we looked at a program that would be more affordable, more attainable for the local jurisdictions to issue the licenses?
Well,
And then two, have we looked at being able to issue maybe multi-year dog licenses, or is that not allowed by statute, or?
I don't know if it's allowed by statute or not, it's something we can look into. You have to set the,
There are when we get into dog licensing, there is a very specific statutory scheme that if we're changing it at all, we have to set it at a certain time of the year. We need to get the treasurer's approval to do that, and it might require changing it's a lot more
60
unfortunate.
days before December 1st.
Okay.
That's,
Correct, and the board can do certain things, but then the treasurer has to sign off on other things depending on what we do in her own capacity. So it is unfortunately a nice, fun, twisted box of cords that have to be unraveled.
Okay.
Yeah, we haven't yet looked into anything different. We went with the BSNA program because we have it. It was included in our package, so that was.
But also so do
Yes.
most municipalities. So we have talked to BSNA a couple of times about this because there should be a way to do it online, an online portal, or there should be a way that the other municipalities that use it should be able to, somehow engage with it. Now the vets, that's a different story. They don't use the program.
Sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
and some counties do the 3-year, that some people, they can renew when their rabies is done, so every 3 years, and it turns out instead of being a license for 1 year that ends December 31st, theirs might end in March when their rabies expires. And so then we have that whole having to keep track. We would need an employee just staying on top of, is everybody getting their dog notification in the mail on time to remind them that they have to renew, and it would turn it into a whole different big can of worms, I think.
But if the board and the treasurer wish to do anything different, it's 60 days prior to December 31st that it has to be all finished. So we'd have to back out from there when the hearings have to be, when the changes have to be, when you'd have to have a decision made by. But final decision is 60 days before December 31st, or December 1st.
Yeah, and certainly at conference, I'll be having some conversation with other treasurers. I tell you what, there's 83 different counties and there's 83 different ways of doing things. That's what we really find with almost everything. But we can certainly, this year, as I've told people, we were forced into it through our system crashing. We made this decision, and it is what it is this year. But we can certainly, it doesn't mean it has to stay this way forever. We can certainly look into other options down the road.
Okay, thank you.
What if somebody doesn't get a dog license?
Well, if they don't get a license, they're breaking
subject to
the law.
Huh?
They're subject to being, is it a misdemeanor or civil infraction? One of the two.
Who does that?
Animal control,
officer.
so that
Oh,
would be Kurt's
So
specialty.
the people that don't get a license, you turn it over to them and they go out and check them all, or something, or?
We don't police it, but if he were to find an animal, a stray animal, and they're not licensed, he would
Oh,
determine who the owner is. Then they may get a ticket and would come in and get a license. Then we've seen that where he's given
okay.
tickets.
I just thought I'd ask.
Yeah, we don't police it, but
Yeah.
animal control does.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Hey, anything?
You did not indicate Commissioner Johnson absent or
Oh,
excused.
he is excused, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, some good discussion on dog license, and Brad, I think that's a great, I paid for my license on my car, my tabs for 2 years, and it was very convenient.
Finally.
Yeah, 'cause
We
they
can do that?
actually, when I bought
We
my
can do
car,
that?
I realized they were like
Sorry.
4 months expired, so, yeah.
I'm
I
excited.
never
Well,
moved mine
oh, I
last
didn't know.
2 years.
I think the online though, things with dog licenses, they have to prove, is the rabies really,
Yeah.
is the the rabies really legit? We ask for their certificate to see it. They can renew over the phone, or they can renew easy enough if their rabies from last year's license is still good. But we need, if people just went online and did it, who's verifying whether it's all
I bet there's
correct?
people that could fake a rabies certificate.
And
you
maybe,
know.
but I'd like to think that
It
most
would
of
not
our
be
general
me,
public
but-
would be honest about it.
Right.
There's only 500 dogs in the county, so.
There's a lot more than that, but.
Let's say there's 5.
More like
500 dogs
5,000.
in the lawn, so.
All right, are we good on Julie's report?
Thank you.
All right, no, that was good discussion. All right, which brings us to our first agenda item. I would entertain a motion to approve the 2024 budget adjustments as presented.
Should be 23, sorry.
2023.
I move to approve the 2023 budget amendments as presented.
And I will support that. Dr. Boggs, anything to highlight?
So very briefly, we did a lot of building, this year, remodeling, changing of things. All those funds had to be adjusted throughout the budget. The veterans expenditures, district court salaries, we under budget a little bit, so we had to shift some money from other accounts inside of district court. So everything nets to zero, and I think we will have a slim but positive overall outcome on the budget.
All right, well, thank you to you and Tracy for that hard work.
Tracy does all the budget adjustments and enters all the information. I just kind of give direction on how to balance.
All right, sounds like it's working. Any further questions or discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed the same, and that will move forward. I would entertain a motion to accept the tentative agreement between AFSCME and Shiawassee County and authorize the chair to execute the final agreement.
So moved.
Support.
So over the course of several months, Eric and Chairman Brodeur and myself met with AFSCME to go over the contract. They had a few items that they wished to adjust as far as the number of days they have to turn in a grievance, increase unexcused absences from 2 to 3. But for the most part, they were very minor changes to the entirety of the contract, and then they adjusted and accepted the wage study for its implementation.
So AFSCME is how many employees approximately?
I believe that they told us it was 12.
Okay, I thought it was not very many. All right. Any other discussion, questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the same. That brings us to item C. I would entertain a motion to approve the proposal from Fleiss and Vandenbrink to assist with the funding, development, and coordination of the state-required materials management plan in an amount not to exceed $93,000 over a 3-year period.
So moved.
Support.
So as you know, the state of Michigan has passed a law requiring recycling and a materials handling initiative to be set forth. There are several steps in this law, and in order to make sure that we meet them, we have reached out to a couple of different consultants looking for prices for it. A couple of our normal people that we have worked with, like AKT Peerless and others, did not do this work, but Fleiss and Vanderbrink do. And there's several steps that we have to do before we ever get to anything to do with a materials recycling plan. So number one, in the next few months, we have to determine, and I think I know the answer from the board, whether we wish to take on this responsibility ourselves or let the state do it for us and determine what the recycling strategy is going to be in the county, which I don't think is something that the Board of Commissioners is going to want. They're going to want to do it themselves. After that, we have to apply for funding. We have to evaluate the board, which is currently the Solid Waste Management Board, which will become the Materials Handling Board, to make sure that we have all the statutory positions filled. And then from that point, we have 3 years. So we have 5 months to make our determination, apply for everything, and then 3 years to develop a plan. And as part of that, Fleece and Vandenberg would be working with those individuals on the materials committee to develop the plan before it comes to the Board of Commissioners and ensure that we hit all of the deadlines. So 93 divided over the 3 years, we will essentially receive around, is it $93,000?
First 3 years.
First 3 years, we will receive $93,000 of funding from the state to do this, which will leave, and Larry's department, as we discussed before, will be the one implementing the plan and supporting the Solid Waste Management Board and supporting this process. However, if we use Fleece and Vandenberg versus one of these other ones that wanted $130,000 to do this, that will leave Larry 60 grand a year to support the implementation of the plan, which I think is a fair and easier way for us to do it. So we don't have to expend money from the general fund, at least in the first 3 years, to meet the state requirements. Larry, do you have additional items to add?
No, that's a good synopsis of what's happening. The state has put a mandate on counties to increase recycling in the counties. And they're looking to get to a benchmark of 40% overall of the state. And right now I think the state's somewhere around 19 or 20% recycling rate. So that in theory will improve over future years. There are some other mandates that we're going to have to meet as far as providing recycling to residents of the county. The city of Wausau has their own mandate. They're going to have curbside recycling offered. So for any municipality that's over 5,000 people, curbside has to be offered at least twice per month. So,
and I think that's a good point to bring up. Owasso is large enough that it has its own separate division under the legislation, and what we do in the county will not have an impact on what Owasso does. They have to come up with their own plan and their own elements. We will put ours out and we will, provide all the information, but what finally does happen, the city of Owasso has to do their own thing because they meet a certain threshold of population that the rest of the county is different. And working with Fleece and Vandenberg, they understand our position on these kind of things, and they understand what it is that we would like to do.
So the funding, oh, go ahead, Gary.
So all the little cities will be taken, like Cronin and New Althorp and all those, will they be under the counties?
We will put out everything that we will give them a spot where they can take recycling and stuff, but a lot of these places are already offering the curbside recycling.
Oh.
They won't, unless they're 5,000 or more, they won't have to do their own specific thing like Owasso. They may get services through ours or not, but they don't have to do the same thing Owasso does.
Now, I'm sure this is all subject to change, but right now it looks like as a county with our population, we will have to have 5 drop-off centers throughout the county, each of them open a minimum of 24 hours per month. So that's kind of expensive because we're gonna have to find a facility where you can do that. There are also things that are going to define what we can or will have to recycle. There are a lot of different things that the Materials Management Board is going to have to figure out what it is we're doing. But fortunately, we have 3.5 years to do it. So we're not have to, they're not making us rush this. At least we have that.
Are they gonna give us any state fund?
I sure hope so.
They're going to give us $93,000 for 3 years.
Do you mean $93,000 a year?
Yes.
For 3 years? Because we're talking about a different 93 over 3 years, and the state's giving us the same amount so we get 3 times as much money as the study is going to cost us. So the other 2 years worth we'll be able to at least begin some kind of planning and implementation and so on with the rest of that money.
So we're gonna have to buy some lots or something and maybe
We
some
don't know
buildings too or something? I mean, it's possible, right?
Well, it could be, but we're far away from that yet.
Yeah.
But the county already does own several pieces of property throughout the county that could have some additional use. But one of the key things of having someone like this assist us with it is they're gonna go through all of the details, all of the minimum requirements, and make sure that we get our funding.
So maybe some of our parks property or something could be used, a portion of it or something, is that possible?
We don't know yet.
Huh?
We don't know yet.
Yeah.
It's way
No.
too early to. Yeah.
We don't know if that under the study, right?
That's part of what this
Study.
consulting firm is going to do. They're gonna go through all these details, and I strongly suspect that more will be coming. So right now, we have 6 months just to say, hey, we wanna do this. I think the last thing we'll talk about more on Wednesday, we're gonna wanna do is let the state come in and tell us what we're going to do. That would be bad.
Well, they kind of are already, but.
Yes, they are. Yeah, they're pushing us around on this one.
I just have a comment, perhaps somewhat foreboding, perhaps, but Township of Perry and Village of Morris did its own recycling, tried to introduce their own recycling plan, and they put at the transfer station in Morris, they put up separate areas for recycling. But it was abandoned after a relatively short time, maybe 6 months, because you needed somebody there to police it, because people were using the recycling facility for just dumping their garbage, their waste. And I think a potential of expense for us would be if we've got 5 sites, even though it may rotate around the county, it's gonna have to be manned to make sure that people aren't misusing it and really perhaps destroying the efficacy of what we're trying to do with this recycling. And I think the recycling date is what, is it 2040 to reach the 40%?
No, I think it's, I think it's 2035.
Oh, so it's even closer than
Yeah.
so anyway, so that's why we don't want the state telling us we gotta do it a certain way and we gotta hire so many people. We may have to hire, but at least we, maybe we'll have a little more control.
And so help us manage our own destiny a little better.
Well, that's what the 2024 elections are all about.
And of course, all of this will have 3 years to go through all these kind of details. We will, I assume, have some pretty good expertise looking at the statutory requirements on this board, as well as, I hope, some wiggle room where we can choose our own people. So hopefully we can come up with something in the next 3 years that, as a county, we can live with, because we have to.
So question, Dr. Bugs, the funding that we're getting, that's based on our,
So
the size of our
$60,000 a year is the base, and then it's 50 cents per head.
okay.
Is that right, Larry?
Correct.
So it's flat amount of 60,000 and then 50 cents per human
That's not just the first year, it's for each.
for 3 years. For 3 years. They have not said after year 3.
I was at a meeting of MAC and they were suggesting that it was 93,000 the first year and then 60.
No, for 3 years.
3 years.
But again, that number varies by your population.
Yeah, and I don't know if they're using just a flat census amount or if they're using some other number to determine what that population is.
Right.
But it'll be approximately $93,000.
For us, okay.
Which is how they calculated their bid as they were looking at it, is essentially based on per capita.
Where did they get that money?
The state?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Where do you,
Well, you
the
think
same
they
place they
get
get
it
all
from-
the money.
Gets it from your taxes.
From your pocket.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
just like
yes.
paying other people's property taxes, now I gotta pay for their recycling.
Absolutely.
All right, anything more on this, study, or this plan? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the same, and that will carry to Wednesday. Anything else for this committee? We are adjourned.